see that you're pursuing a Doctor of Laws degree.
Yes.
In which area?
In constitutional law. My topic is beyond adjudication and analysis of judicial oversight in the implementation and delivery of social and economic rights in South Africa.
And why do you want to be a commissioner of the IEC?
The reasons why I want to become a commissioner is because I would like to form part of the people who contribute to the strengthening of constitutional democracy.
Who contribute to
the strengthening of constitutional democracy.
Yes. How do you see yourself contributing to the strengthening of constitutional democracy as a commissioner of the IEC? Or maybe let me put it differently. What strengths do you bring? What role do you see yourself playing? What contribution do you see yourself playing if appointed the commissioner of the IEC?
My strengths would be good corporate governance because of my experience as a non-executive director. I would bring good governance, and I would also bring during my time as a non-executive director, I've learned a lot of things, which includes, amongst others, how to craft a strategy, and also how to give strategic direction to an institution. And I also bring a strength which relates to risk management and also auditing and also compliance with policies and legislations. Besides that, I'm in academia. I also bring experience in terms of research because I've written a number of articles and also presented a lot of papers and conferences. And I've done a lot of research which I've been awarded. I've been the best overall emerging researcher for the University of Limpopo for twice, for 3 years, from 2010 to 2016. So that experience of research will also assist in research.
As a lawyer, why do you think it's necessary to have a judge as a commissioner of the IEC? I don't understand it myself, but I would want help from you in case you're giving it some thought. Why should it be a judge?
The reasons why you're supposed to have a judge is that the commission itself must be impartial and it must only subject itself to the rule of law and the constitution. And the reasons why you have to have a judge is to ensure that you have that impartiality, you have that independency, and you also have that trust you want from the institution of the IEC, because this is a very important institution which plays a very important role in the constitutional democracy.
Now, you have helped me. I never thought about it to that extent, quite frankly. Reflecting on the IEC as an institution, are there things that have given you reason to be concerned? Important things, and if so, what are they? Or is it fine?
Yeah, there are a number of areas which also give me a concern, especially the constitutional court judgment on the voters' roll, which it appears that the IEC is not going to meet its deadline of ensuring that the voters' roll issue is sorted out before 30 June. And also the other issues which gives me concern much is towards the 2016 local government election. There were a lot of things which were bad, which were not good. So I think
like what? strategies and practical measures which you have taken to make sure that you don't miss the deadline?
The practical strategy which comes to my mind is to invest in technology because registering voters is a long process. We are talking about the number of voters. But to make the process simpler is to invest in technology where you have electronic registration and even when you check the addresses because the way we do things now of allowing voters to go to the registration station or to visit IEC offices, to me, I find it long. But if you invest in the technology, to then extent that wherever you are, you can update your address. And even if you want to register, whenever you are, you can just go to your phone, you register. So
Well,
to make things easier.
well, this is where I'm coming from. In all likelihood, most of the people whose addresses are missing are people in the deep rural areas, some of whom might even be unemployed and do not have phones, and they can't relate to the technology that you are talking about. Some are illiterate, others are in the informal settlements. So, what then would you suggest as a practical measure that would help the IEC to speedily ensure that people either have addresses and those addresses are recorded, or there is a way of describing their location in a manner that renders them traceable. I know in my own village, some people have got numbers, others don't have numbers. Others, it's a section where informal settlements have just mushroomed. How do you deal with that based on your own South African experience? How do you make sure that there are addresses recorded and speedy?
I think what the best strategy there would be to invest on voter education because most voters in South Africa they don't understand the importance of election and why you have to vote. Some they don't understand that this is a right to vote and a right which our grandparents have died for, fighting for us to vote. So it's to invest on voter education and also to ensure that registrations are not done on specific dates. Is to ensure that all those IEC offices are next to the people because more often than not you find them in cities. So in rural areas they are not there. So it's to ensure that you have mobile offices where people can also register and also to go deeper because there are those who can't go to those voting stations even if you open them because they can't walk. Some are disabled. Is to go to them and ensure that you register them.
If appointed a commissioner, what would you propose should be done to ensure that almost everybody involved in the electoral process, employed by the IEC, is honest and will not go out of his or her way to cheat the system, to rig the elections, in order to advantage one political party or some political parties over others?
The strategy there would be to ensure that all those who are employed are vetted. And besides vetting, and also when they are being selected, there are rigorous measures and mechanisms which are in place to detect because there are those who are not honest. There are those people who are not just who are not honest in life, and sometimes the system allows them to be in. also if you have vigorous interview processes, you are also going to eliminate those. And also to invest on education, because sometimes you must educate your communities so that they know what is the task ahead of them, what are they expected to do, and what they need to do, and to also ensure, to also inform them that they must be loyal to their country and owe allegiance to South Africa, because when you work there, it's not about you, it's about the country.
Now, how do you ensure that the one or the ones vetting are themselves trustworthy?
Of course, even rating itself, it cannot be 100%. That's why I'm saying that even when you select them, you must also ensure that the process itself is vigorous to such an extent that it will eliminate those and ensure that capable candidates are appointed.
How do you vet them? How would you propose that they be vetted? What is involved in this vetting? How would the vetting have to be done
The vetting,
to say vouch the electoral process from the dishonest?
yes, of course, the vetting process cannot be 100%. It cannot give you the 100%, but when you do the vetting, you will ensure that you check their applications, you check their record, whether they have criminal record and so on, and you work with South Family Service and state security agency to do that. But also is also to go back to the community also. Like before you, even when you shortlist them, there must be a system when you publish their names in the community to afford the community an opportunity to comment on their suitability for the position. Because you might find that the community are aware of who those candidates are because they come from the community. Sometimes, if you give the members of the community an opportunity to also comment on their suitability, to also assist the process.
And you belong to a political party.
Yes, I'm a member of the party.
Are you willing to disclose which one? Are you willing? You don't have to, it's up to you.
I think I must be honest and willing to disclose. I'm a member of that political party.
And you occupy an office in the party.
No, I'm not occupying a position. I'm just my involvement is one level, not occupying a position.
Now, this the criminal record you allegedly have. What is it about?
I have the record I'm having is about traffic violations. I was caught speeding.
In what zone driving at what speed?
It was a one-way zone. It was a highway where I was caught exceeding the speed limit of 180.
Yes, exceeding to what extent?
It was around 150 something kilometers. 150 something.
How far back?
It was in 2010.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Advocate Nevondwe, obviously you are a member of a political party. And should you be nominated as a commissioner, an IEC commissioner, come the 1st of December, two things. How would you have the pressure or pressures that would come from dealing with political parties? And I'm asking this question given the fact that we all know that next year's elections in 2019 will be highly contentious. definitely there could be some pressures that will be coming from political parties, including the party that you belong to.
Yeah, I think first of all, if I get nominated to this position, and I will resign my membership from the political party. And how would I handle the pressure? Is that I am a professional.
Sorry, why would you resign?
Because I cannot continue to be a member of the political party while I'm a commissioner. Because when you are a commissioner, you must be independent, impartial, and only subject yourself to the Constitution and the rule of law. So based on that, I will have to resign. And how will I handle the pressure? I'm a professional, and first and foremost. And besides being professional, I've handled a lot of pressures from where I've been working. So I will be able to cope because I owe my allegiance to the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa and to my country, and I will do my best to always act in the best interest of my country for whatever situation.
The second question that I have is that according to your resume, you seem to be quite a busy person. You are a lecturer at the University of Limpopo. You sit in a number of boards, and I just want to find out: should you be nominated as a, how would you deal with with these current engagements, given that you seem to be quite busy? Thank you.
Yeah, if I'm nominated to the position, I will just resign from all my positions and focus on the position itself because it's an important position. It requires undivided attention, and I will ensure that I commit myself to the institution and also to the Constitution and to the people of South Africa.
Okay, the last question from me, Mr. Mbongo. Um, the, the, the systems in many companies are usually hacked. Um, and we have seen a lot of hacking that has happened in a number of countries as well, including the US, and Kenya is one of them here in Africa. I just want to find out if you are nominated as the commissioner, and again, given the skill sets that you bring in, as a strategist, as a person who's been handling, audits and risks management, how would you address the threats to the IEC system? Perhaps, the threats that are posed by foreign powers or interests, for example.
I think first and foremost is to ensure that we invest on technology. But even if you invest on technology, it doesn't detect you from the risk. But risk will always be there. You just have to manage it and to ensure that you are ready for it. So, but investing in technology, in the best technology, and then also ensuring that you update or you keep the good standards of that technology, and also you ensure that you have a risk management strategies where you can be able to detect the risk and also mitigate it to ensure that you have a proper system.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning, Advocate. My question is around voter education. What can we do differently as a country to educate citizens about democracy, the right to vote, and the importance thereof?
don't know what they are voting for. So I think what we must do, we need to invest much on that education. Our focus be on the rural areas and informal sectors, because that's where people they don't understand. To educate them so that when you talk about civic life, it means that when you exercise your political choice, it means that you are saying that I'm exercising this political choice because my political choice will be able to give me the service I need. And when you exercise your right to vote, it means that you are participating in that process. That whoever you exercise the political right to will be able to govern and do what you want as a citizen. So, but more often than not, is that people from the rural areas, they've lost hope and they believe that even if you go and cast your vote, you are wasting your time because things won't change. It will remain the same. But it is because we have not invested much on political education in rural areas. Because we hear about IEC election during voter registration weekend or whatever days they manipulate it. But over every day we don't hear about it. And maybe it's high time when there must be outreach programs, partnerships, civil society, academia, and private sector, business, and everything about investing in voter education. Why is it important for you as a citizen to cast a vote? Why your vote is powerful? Why your vote will be able to contribute to change in a society? Because each and everybody wants a change in society. For you to effect that change, it is through voting. It is through that powerful way you vote when you cast that vote. I think we need to invest much on teaching the previous disadvantage in our communities about the importance of voter, of the importance of election, and the importance because when you go and cast your vote, you are contributing in the promotion of personal democracy. You are strengthening your democracy.
Second question, Chairperson. In the summary of your CV, you talked previously during this interview about good governance. Now, good governance goes along with ethical conduct, with integrity, and our task is to put forward names of people that we believe would carry those ethical standards and so on. Now, in the summary of your CV, it is mentioned that you were shortlisted for a post with the Media Development and Diversity Agency, and there was an objection based on you having allegedly misrepresented your academic publishing record. Can you explain that to us?
Yes. I heard about that. I read it also through the media because when I went to the interview, that question was asked to me. I clarified it, and the panel was satisfied with my clarification. I think there was somebody who misread my CV and start to have certain allegations which I didn't know as a person. So, but I clarified that because my CV is there. So whatever publication I have, I can be able to account for those because I wrote those publications. I mean, I just read it in the media. When I went to the interview, it was raised one panelist, and I clarified and I said, my CV is there. You can go and satisfy yourself with all these publications. And I think it was sorted out at that moment because I believe that for you to be a leader, you need to have integrity. You must be honest. I'm honest.
you are at the university currently, you are engaging with students. I think besides partnering, especially encouraging the youth to vote and use their vote, it will be interesting to hear from you now. You're still a member of the ANC in your ward and at the university. What um, contribution or what are you doing to encourage them, especially make the young people to be, aware of their right and how can they use their right? Have you done anything as far as that is concerned?
Yeah, I think with regard to that, my involvement at the university is much at a postgraduate level, where I supervised a number of undergraduate and master's level, and graduated more. There are more than 40 which I supervised. And also in my community, I do have me together with the other young people who have developed a youth organization called Community Youth Development, wherein we invest much on education, career, motivating young people to take education seriously. And also, we also invest in sport, we also invest in cultural activities. I do that more often through that youth organization, where I got invited to schools, speak to learners, motivate them, and so on. Besides that, I'm also involved in Tango Victim Empowerment Program. It's an NGO which deals with victim empowerment, trauma counseling, and also assists those who are living with an HIV and AIDS, and so on, give them that support, and so on. I'm very much involved in community and issues which also affect community. But in my dealings, or in whatever I do, sometimes our programs are not diverted much on encouraging people to young people to vote and so on. It's more on education, more on empowering them, and so on. I think that's what I do every day.
Okay, I think you need to also focus on that because it's not an issue of voting, but again, as you said, allegiance to your country, knowing your constitution, what it values, because I mean, the very same young people, even if they are in master's level, we still need those people to be leaders of the future. Who funds Tohaya and Victim Empowerment, or what is your involvement in it? Are you part of the leadership? Do you know who funds it?
No, I'm part of the board. It's funded by, there are a lot of donors who fund it outside South Africa and also within South Africa. I think those are the funders. I'm involved much on the board level, so the funding itself is done by management. But as a board, we develop a strategy on funding and how to get funding and how to sustain the organization. I think this organization it has been there since 1998, even to date. I think we have a lot of volunteers, which are around 80 and so on. So we got good structures. So now we apply for, we do proposals, request for funding for this donor organization and so on.
Do you know some of them, especially the prominent ones?
I think the one I know, I think is UNICEF. UNICEF also fund us.
And are you sure that your focus is Tohaya and victim empowerment? It's only focusing on the issues of victims?
Yes.
Because I saw them one time they were Celestine a protest or relating to other issues away from issues relating to, or what impact does the board have on those issues?
Yes, I think what we do, we don't deal with sex environment, we deal with victim empowerment and also protect the rights of minority groups, gay and lesbian. So when their rights are violated, we go
do you know that, or as the board, are you informed when they are going for those protests? That's what I want to know.
Yes, we are informed, especially when there are cases about child abuse and also rape and so on. So our volunteers go to court together with members of the community to demonstrate so that they ensure that the rights of victims are protected. So we are informed.
Mr. Novondo, my question goes back to Tobengo Victim Empowerment again. As a board member, we are aware of some leadership challenges that have been surrounding TVET for quite a number of years. We're quite aware of them, that there are serious, or there have been serious leadership challenges within TVET. How are you dealing with those challenges? Because sometimes if there are serious leadership challenges in an organization or an NGO or a CBO that seem to be doing quite good work on the ground, but if there are these serious leadership challenges, some of the donors or key strategic partners would actually sort of like shy away from. So how have you dealt with these challenges as the board?
I'm aware of the challenges, and I think as the board we have dealt with those challenges. Now the board is stable. Even at management, we have done changes, strategic changes there. So I think now the organization it is stable. It used not to be stable, but we have normalized everything. We have a fully functional board. We have a fully functional management. We have even been doing some changes in the institution. I think as I'm speaking now, TTVP is in good hands and is focusing on its mandate of empowering the previously disadvantaged or marginalized people.
Mr. Novondo, I really appreciate your responses as well as your, the interventions that you have done. But we're looking for practical. What have you done? Practically, what have you done? Yes, thank you. Just if you can just give us,
Yes.
Your practical interventions. It could be, you can mention 2, 3, 4, 5 things
Yes.
that you have done just to allay our anxieties.
I think what we have done practically there is that there were a lot of issues and there were a lot of problems. I think there was, I don't want to mention names of people, but there was one staff member working there for a very long time in that institution. And sometimes that staff member didn't have good relationship with a lot of people, including government and so on. But that's not a problem because it's the nature of the NGO. As the NGO, you fight for the rights of the marginalized. And more often than not, you always clash with your government. But that's not the issue. But out of the challenges, what we have done, we have put processes, policies in place. We have put governance processes in place to ensure that everything is stabilized. We have reviewed even the structure. We have because previously we used to have even board members who are not even attending meetings and so on, not reaching quorum. But those are things of the past. We have finalized that. We have a strategy. We have subcommittees functioning, meeting regularly, and so on. And even our financial systems. Remember, the issue of financial instability within the NGO is but our financial stability we have normalized it. We are fully functional. All our workers are paid every month and so on. I think in terms of governance, we have normalized that process. Everything is fine as I'm speaking. But it is through the intervention of the board where we work as a collective, as a team, to ensure that the peoples of Lembe the role to play, and also the people of the public about our services. I think we, as I'm speaking now,
I'm asking you this question only because you're a lawyer. Why do you find it normal that your people should protest at court? What is the purpose for protesting at court? Just keep the mic on, don't switch it off.
thank you. I think the issue of demonstration is something which we don't promote. We don't promote, but we believe that when you have a rape case and a sexual abuse case, for you to be heard, or you need to demonstrate outside the court, not to disrupt the court, to allow the court to go far away from the court and demonstrate so that you can be seen as giving support to that victim.
Yes, well, you see, I'm asking you, as an advocate, you're an officer of the court. And what is the meaning, what is the purpose of doing it outside court? Either saying no bail or either saying life sentence. What do you see any danger? Let me put it differently. Do you see any danger in doing that? Or is it just a good thing after all? The freedom of association and so on.
I think there are two mixed feelings. You want to exercise your constitutional right,
Yes,
demonstrate,
yes.
but at the same time, it is bad also because judges must be allowed, must be given space to adjudicate matters without any interference.
What happens if they are saying no bail and the judicial officer, after assessing everything, decides that there should be bail? In circumstances where an advocate is party to an organization that says it's fine to go and say no bail, it must go and say life sentence. What happens if in the execution of his or her constitutional mandate, the one who is trained to adjudicate, who is employed to adjudicate, decides differently? What does the protest do to public confidence? I don't know what your experience is. My experience is once the magistrate or the judge says, bail, he's captured. They have paid him a bribe. These people are corrupt. Because the minute you allow them to do that, you are basically saying nobody should disagree with them. They are the one deciding a case. You may just as well surrender the constitutional responsibility to adjudicate to the public that is protesting. Otherwise, public confidence in the judiciary is gone. Why do you allow it to happen in the name of your organization? Or did you not think it through?
I think in our organization, I think what we do is that prior to the case goes to court, we interact with the media or stakeholders and protect our victims. Sometimes we don't even go to court, but we do our work prior to the court also, where we talk about it, our stand and how we support our victims, but not to an extent that we disrupt the court processes.
No, I'm not talking about disrupting. And I find it absolutely in order for people to go there in t-shirts and say away with rape or down with rapists, something like that. Inside the court, I see nothing wrong with that. I've got a challenge with prescribing what the judge or a magistrate must decide, what sentence must be imposed. Why don't the magistrate just pack and go? The people have spoken. And forget about applying the law. Because if you do, you must just make sure that it is what the people want that you decide. Are we not destroying our judicial system without realizing?
Yeah, I think that conduct to me, we don't tolerate it. It's wrong.
No, I thought you were saying that as to demonstrate how good your organization continuous. We go to court and demonstrate. That's the point you made.
Remember we demonstrate in various ways, not necessarily going to court. We demonstrate by issuing press releases and so on, not necessarily going to court, but not necessarily demonstrating, but trying to assert the rights of the victim.
I thought you said you demonstrate outside court. Your people demonstrate outside court, not inside. You don't want to disrupt, but you do it outside court.
No, in some cases, we carry placards and
Yes.
talk about the rights of the victim, but not necessarily prescribing what the court must do.
Or you talk about the right.
Yes,
You don't
the right.
say no bail, no less than 25 years.
No, it's not within our constitution.
Okay. All right. No, thank you so much, Advocate. You're excused. Thank you, sir. Colleagues, there's been an arrangement under two. I've been told that three candidates coming have agreed that Ms. Pepu should come first. So she's the one we will interview. Good morning, Ms. Pepu.
Good day, Dr.
Are you well?
I'm well.
Thank you. I'm sure there's no need to ask you whether you are relaxed. You look very relaxed. Why do you want to be a commissioner of the IEC?
Mainly because I think that it's an important part of our constitutional dividend. It's a part of our democratic dividend. And I think that it's also an important time to defend these sorts of institutions. I think that it's also an important time to bring in diverse voices, diversity, and fresh voices, fresh ideas, which in many respects, based on some of the work that I've been doing over the past 20 years, I think that I have had some opportunity to contribute to different discourses. And lastly, because I think that liberation is an ongoing project, and with elections coming, it's also an important time to defend the gains of liberation. And I guess some of us need to go to the inside and make some kind of a contribution where possible.
How do you know that your voice will be different from the voices that have been there?
Well, I followed the trajectory of the Commission, Chief Justice, over the last 20 years. And I've also been aware of some of the debates that have arisen in relation to transformation of patronized technology, including the IEC, ideas around democracy and elections as being very intertwined and not mutually exclusive at all. The role of elections in peace and security, not only in South Africa but across the continent, and the very important role that South Africa has to play as an anchor, as a democratic anchor regionally as well. And I think that the work that I've done and the expertise that I bring has enabled me to, I think, have some kind of a vantage point of the sort of debates that have taken place. And yes, I do believe that my voice may be able to lend something a bit different to some of those voices.
What changes, if any, do you think the IEC needs to make in order for it to be more effective in what it is mandated to do?
There's so many. I mean, one or two would be getting people to be interested in voting. So go and vote. But I think that certainly the credibility, presenting themselves, presenting the IEC as a credible institution that has legitimacy, that has popular support, that actually is not only interested in turning up every 5 years and going through the mechanics of procedural electioneering, but actually being interested in the things that take place in between the 5 years, the kind of research that needs to take place in between, keeping up with trends that may be emerging globally. And also, I think very importantly, engaging with different constituent groups. One of the mistakes I think that we make in general as people is to assume that youth are one group, women are one group, etc. And there are different reasons why these particular groups are not participating as vibrantly and as robustly as they probably should in these sort of processes. So I think that that would be a key improvement that the IEC would make would be to encourage people, especially different sector groups, to be interested, to participate. I think linked to that would be a much more robust public education, a continuous public education, public engagement process, which goes beyond the BSOs. BSOs are fine, but those tend to be. I think it's really important to think about things around voter education that is part of the school curriculum, that is part of a campus curriculum, that is part of the things that people are listening to on taxis, at taxi ranks every day. So that this thing becomes an embedded discourse, conversation that as South Africans we're having with ourselves all the time.
Does the IEC look like a credible institution, or does there appear to be some credibility deficit there itself as well?
I think like any institution, there will always be space for evolution and space for dynamism. I think organizations grow. Organizations react and respond to the context of the times. Organizations react and respond to what people out there are saying and what people out there are doing. And right now in this country, we're told that we're in the midst of a new dawn, a different era, and I think that with elections coming 12 months from now, in this particular context, the credibility needs to be of the utmost, and that dynamism right now is needed at this moment at the utmost.
Is there dynamism and the appropriate response to the challenges of our times? Has it been displayed by the IEC, or does something more needs to be done? And if something more needs to be done, what specific things needs to be done to bring about the necessary change?
So I think in the past there's been the perception, and I think there have been debates around, for example, the inclusivity, the capacity for parties across the political spectrum to participate meaningfully and deeply in electoral processes as a result of funding, as a result of access to media and other resources. So certainly, I think leading up to the election, that would be one thing that would be useful to ensure that the IEC is seen as even more so than previously as a credible body, as a body that's completely unbiased in its functions. Another one, of course, would be how to experiment with bringing more people onto voters' roll. I've been aware that, of course, the IEC has been embroiled in a number of legal debates and legal matters around the electoral roll. Now, it's not the role of the IEC to give people houses, to give people addresses, but it is certainly the role of the IEC to ensure that there is that the franchise is distributed in ways that are dynamic and different. So there's the idea that some people have had, for example, of provisional voting, where you appear at a ballot box on the day of voting with your ID document, some form of an identification, and you're able to vote and cast a provisional vote, ensuring that your voice is heard, even if you don't have a fixed address. This is also linked to the trust that people need to have in institutions. I'm not sure whether we're at the level of, say, India, where people can literally give I live under a bridge as an address, a bridge by M12 as an address, because the levels of trust and the culture are completely different. But there have to be ways in which we can ensure that people are able to exercise
their right of franchise, even if their current material circumstances of not necessarily having a fixed abode are not necessarily in place.
We've touched on funding, and I deliberately confine my question to public funding. Public funding and nothing more. Do you have some thoughts on our public funding? Is it regulated appropriately? Are you happy with the distribution of the resources
I think that we could do
at the
some.
moment?
Sorry. Yes, Chief Justice. I think
The distribution among different parties participating in the elections.
we could do differently. Again, the sliding scale scenario means that there'll always be the distribution of funding according to electoral preference and the volume of seats that a party has been able to accrue over a series of elections or any election and their parliamentary presence. Now, one other way to turn that on its head would be to say that that does not necessarily mean that other parties are not necessarily attracting the same amount of support, but that maybe their messages are not heard clearly enough. They may be hampered by access to funding. They may be hampered by their capacity and ability to perhaps convey a message in a way that is exciting and audible to the electorate. So I would say that we need to think very deeply and much more imaginatively about ways in which we can make sure that the playing field is a bit leveled out. Otherwise, so-called small parties will remain small, and so-called larger parties will remain large. And whether that is really giving us the opportunity for greater talent and for different diversity of ideas to emerge on the electoral spectrum is highly debatable.
I don't necessarily support cut and paste, but is our system perhaps similar to what other constitutional democracies do, those that do fund political parties from the public purse?
It's very similar. I mean, I think across most countries across the continent have immediately inherited both the ways of doing politics, both the ways of parliamentary politics, and also, of course, the ways of managing and administering democracy through electoral bodies. There is a lot to be said about the fact that one of the things that's interesting about the African context is that because our politics are so robust and sometimes far more volatile than other contexts across the world, we have actually been able to develop electoral systems and develop management systems which are setting the pace across the world. So, I mean, we see things in Somalia and Kenya, etc., that are not taking place in the UK or in the US, mainly because, of course, the nature of their politics is completely different and their context is completely different.
Now, are there things you have observed about the way in which the IEC, at a commission level, or at the level of commissioners, have been doing things that have been done by the commissioners that you wish were handled differently, and which, if you were to be appointed a commissioner, you would advocate for a different approach to them?
Perhaps one thing that we could think about is sectoral, and much more defined areas of specialization for commissioners, so that the people who come in are really far more au fait with key areas of work. So whether it is research, whether it is exploring technology, whether it is developing democracy, whether it is the role of elections in then developing and contributing to public and social policy or redistribution. I would that perhaps commissioners were far more specialized in their areas of work and perhaps had greater depth in those areas of work and were enabled through the commission to then specialize and become platforms of expertise or mistresses of expertise, so that by the time one has completed their time at their commission, there is a key element, a key benchmark, a key milestone milestone that we can point to, and that these would be continuous, so that even when people come and people go, the programs that they have put in place will be an ongoing continuum, a dynamic continuum.
And what would you have to say to a possible response that says, well, that's the responsibility of technocrats. That's what you ought to require of technocrats. They need their expertise at an operational level, and maybe not so at a policy making level.
I would slightly disagree. I think that it's actually important that at policy level, one has deep insight and deepish knowledge, even to the extent where one isn't able to supervise effectively, qualitatively. That has a content base from which to lead the processes and lead the strategy, lead the conversations appropriately. I think that's, if there's a disconnect between the technocrats and the commissioners, it can actually begin to possibly cause those elements and those dimensions to work without as much synergy as is necessary.
Should emphasis in that scenario be on technical skills more than, or to the same extent as depth in relation to an understanding of a political environment, or should the one dominate the other?
Probably there should be equilibrium between the two, because certainly the people who have been previously nominated as commissioners and currently nominated as commissioners are nominated not because they have some social, political, and technocratic field of expertise in their current ambit. What I think would be interesting would be then for them to be developed from and to be 7 years is a long time. In 7 years, one can begin to really go far. In 7 years, you do that's like the length of time it takes to get a BA in honors and a master's. So there's, in theory, there's the opportunity to develop deep roots in understanding the functionality and the modalities of different dimensions of democracy and the democratic distribution and distribution of voice through the electoral processes in all its dimensions.
Ought the responsibility to lie with the IEC or elsewhere to facilitate a process that seeks to test the capacity of those seeking to lead the country, the program, the provinces? I'll tell you what I'm talking about.
Those usually many electoral systems will have some kind of a televised debate or radio debate, where the incumbents
Town hall debate
type thing. Okay, so I don't think so. Perhaps it would be a joint venture between an institution such as the IEC, media partners, and perhaps Parliament. I think that it would be very important for it to be seen as something that is non-partisan, something that is accessible, and something that is sincere. It's easy to turn up on the day and talk well. Whether then that capacitates one to be able to lead a country, a state, or a province, or a council for the remaining 5 years is something entirely different. And I think that we have to be very careful not to go back into sort of the hit and run Mbizo model, which is, though useful, doesn't necessarily go into the substantive business of engaging with public citizenry effectively. And I think that, yes, although it would be useful for constituents to have the opportunity to engage meaningfully, vigorously with possible incumbents, it cannot be isolated to an event, to a town hall meeting, but rather to a series of engagements, a series of ways in which encounters which should be built into our democratic systems. I mean, I think that we already have them. The question is how effectively we are utilizing them.
Do you think hacking is something for the IEC to worry about without being hacked, what happened to other jurisdictions, or not so much?
Chief Justice, hacking is something for just about every institution, I think, to worry about. Information is high currency right now. That's why you have your Edward Snowdens and your whistleblowers and your WikiLeaks. So yeah, information is high currency. It's certainly not the core business of the IEC, but I think performing elections and performing democratic dividends effectively means ensuring the integrity of information must be protected. So if the budget is available, then by all means the expertise needs to be brought in to enable the IEC's integrity of information and data to be protected optimally.
Colleagues. Good morning, Ms. Pekko. How are you? Thank you very much. I just want to go back to one of the input that you alluded to earlier about engaging particular groups, and you made mention of young people and women getting these groups to vibrantly participate in voter registration and as well as all IEC programs. I just want to practically, how do you, if you can be appointed as a commissioner, just describe in a more practical way how you would engage with these particular groups. How would you improve voter apathy that we see that young people are currently displaying? How would you make sure that you access hard to reach groups, particularly women in rural areas and young people in those rural areas as well? Thank you.
Thank you. So the whole notion of youth participation, and if you don't mind, I'll address the two constituents separately. There's this whole fallacy that young people are lost and that they're not interested and they're not engaged, which of course isn't true. And I think that we've seen in the last couple of years with the rise of student activism that clearly there are high levels of engagement and interest. And what possibly is lacking is that the vehicles that exist have not been interesting or compelling, presented a compelling case to young people to use. So the one thing would certainly be campus education, civic education in high schools, at university level. The second thing would certainly to involve young people, even in voter registration and as election monitors, election officials. Right now, the default is that teachers are usually have usually been the main personnel that are brought in. But I think that if we could use different multiplicity of stakeholders, including young people, they would, I think, perhaps be far more keen and far more. It would be an ongoing lesson in how this stuff works and pique their interest. I think the third thing is that, of course, the messaging from political parties has to be a bit more specific. That again is not the role of the IEC. But what the IEC's business is to ensure that people are interested in voting, to ensure that they feel that there's some kind of collateral interest in this. What do you get for your vote? And the notion that votes can be wasted is something that a lot of young people, including my young people that I live with in my house, have said. It's like, well, what's the point? And I think that the idea of showing that there is a point to voting is very important. The fourth is, as well, is also to evoke a sense of history. I get very emotional when people say that they don't vote because the way their house doing washing. People did a lot. My family, many people, they did a lot so that people could actually make this kind of contribution. So I think that this sort of evoking some sort of a sense that this is really a national, it's a responsibility. It's a form of national responsibility. And I think that we haven't been able to carve a very good sense of that in this country, and we haven't had a continuum in that regard. And I think that young people would feel far more interested. This is much more than watching Sarafina once a year. It has to be a continuous debate and dialogue that we're having. The fifth is also to engage with young people on their own media, because young people are, they're creating media all the time. Twitter is not cutting edge anymore. Facebook is not cutting edge. These are passé, in fact, and they're creating their own media. We need to find and meet them there and enable them to guide, lead, participate meaningfully in all of these conversations. When it comes, of course, to women, there's so many different social, traditional issues that come into play. We do have legislation that on paper seems to facilitate the rights of women to participate meaningfully, actively in the economy, in politics, but of course, again, the deliverables, there's a huge gap between what we say and the deliverables. There are different reasons for that. And I don't think that it's just because women lack confidence. I don't think that that's true at all. I do think that sometimes the support structures at party level are lacking. The way that politics happens, of course, happens at sometimes antisocial hours, so at weekends, evenings. So I think that if parties are interested in engaging women, they need to figure out institutionally how then they're going to change the way and the spaces in which these things happen. Another thing, of course, is the idea of block voting. The instances that you'll find where the family votes a particular way, and dad says, we are voting this direction. I mean, there are still some horror stories of people going into electoral booths together, going into the polling booth together to see where, check out how have you voted our way. And I think that we need to break down those sorts of cycles and again, ensure that women are participating actively. There's also this idea that politics are dirty, that it's other people's business to clean up the country. And of course it's not. It's all about business to clean up our country because we all live here. Just in the same way that if I drop a piece of paper, it's my job to pick it up. So it's nobody's job except mine to clean up my country. So I think that we need to really get away from the idea that that some women have, that it's somebody else's job. And of course we can't get away from patriarchy. We can't get away from the fact that there are still societies and communities where it is very difficult for people to find their voice. And I think that the IEC, with other community-based stakeholders, has to be very robust and as I said before, very, 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 very deliberate in the ways and the spaces in which they engage and make these engagements ongoing, this capacity building ongoing. And this whole notion that democracy and democracy education belongs to everybody and that it's something that should happen all the time. And faith-based organizations also have a role to play in reframing the ways in which people see themselves, the ways in which women see themselves, but the ways in which men see women and the place that they ascribe to them. I hope that answers you.
Thank you. I think the last question from me. We believe that elections next year will be highly contentious. And just very quickly, how do you think you are going to handle pressures that may come from political parties, if any?
Firmly, equitably, calmly, with a very solid evidence base. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning. You know, I am always concerned about intergenerational legacy. And at times we become such hard-nosed technocrats that we tend to lose our empathy. You know, we go into the workplace and we forget the values that we bring along, respect for dignity, and so on. How important is it to you to interact with, you know, talking intergenerational, to interact with the younger generation in a way that enhances their self-confidence? You already mentioned the issue of self-confidence, especially amongst younger women, so that we leave people that believe in themselves, because that is part of democracy. Am I making sense?
Yes, you are. Thanks for the question, Commissioner. Yeah. So the whole idea of everything has a moment in the season. And there's some things that are achievable immediately, and as you rightly say, many others are legacy projects, which are not going to be completed within 7 years. And I think that you pick up on something that I was also alluding to with Commissioner Matebula, which is that it's very key for us to build succession planning, and to build it not only in formal political or institutional structures, but also to build a kind of a plethora of spaces and places where different voices and different young voices are able to emerge. Now, one place that this is, of course, has been emerging is in the student movement. Another place that this is emerging is young people in business. Another place that this has been emerging is young people in social movements as well. And people doing, another is, of course, young people in social enterprise and young entrepreneurs. How then these different streams and ideas come together is extremely important. Now, I am extremely passionate about working with young people in my personal capacity and in the professional capacity which I have been afforded. And I think that this is mainly because of the ideas and the vibrancy, the energy that emerges from there. I don't think we can give people confidence. Confidence is created through platforms. Confidence is created through doing. Confidence is created by enabling people to come in and do the work, work alongside the so-called grown-ups, and really imbibe the skills, the ideas. I think one of the things that is problematic about African politics at large is our, and I say this with all respect to the elders, is our deferential, overweening or deference to chronological eldership. We find it very difficult to say no, so people shut down. And I think that there are ways to respectfully engage, and it's very important to respectfully engage and respectfully disagree, which is why we're not going to get rid of the old man of Africa syndrome until we're able to undo this whole idea that and yet, of course, they do force it now and again. We do force it now and again. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. Ms. Watsiva. I like the name. Good morning. I've heard you responding to the CJ. We'll start with the issue of India, even a person under the bridge, that people should exercise their right irrespective of the address. Can you unpack that? Because we have this Constitutional Court judgment, and the IEC has up until the end of June to make sure that the 1.2 million people who don't have addresses have addresses. 1st of December, you get in there. What would you do to make sure that the 1.2 has their addresses on the voters' roll? And again, do you understand why do we have to have addresses on the voters' roll?
Thank you. So it's very important for people, I mean, for there to be some sort of a static place where we can house people, find people. The one thing is, of course, to avoid the specter of voters, ghost voters being busted. You don't live in the area, to boost the numbers of a particular political party. That's the one danger and the one risk. The second risk, of course, is with over-mobility, is the opportunity to multiple votes as well, multiple voting. The third risk would be then that, unfortunately, what happens is that, for example, if you're a student and you're registered at, I don't know, Wits, the area closest to Wits, you go home to KwaZulu-Natal during election time. You're not going to come all the way back to Joburg to vote. So it works as both a housing for order, a placekeeper for order, but also it can also work against the whole notion of inclusivity. Although it is, of course, very important to have a means. So hence the suggestion that I think I've seen in some of the legal arguments of provisional voting, where a person is able to vote with an ID book, and then perhaps, and of course, you get your ink and so that it's clear that you have already voted. And in the event of a particular turn of events, all of those votes are then counted and accounted for. So that then the person under the bridge scenario is slightly more orderly, but is certainly accounted for. I think the other thing that's fairly useful in that is that it then enables us to be able to have a far bigger pool of people who are actually voting, because a large amount of people are off the voters' roll, not because they lack interest, but also because of various administrative glitches and administrative concerns and difficulties that are quite difficult to, for whatever reason, have been quite difficult to resolve. But I also do think that, again, ultimately, it is the role of the state to provide homes and addresses, and that's a whole different debate. I think the best that the IEC can do is possibly to ask for an extension to ensure that then, in some way, there's an accountable means of enabling representation on the day of elections at the ballot box of as many interested citizens as possible.
Thank you. And you further deliberated on the issue of the electoral system, how to debate, and you correctly said talk well, sometimes not delivering. As the IEC commissioner, and you were even saying you'll engage meaningfully, robustly. 1st of December, before maybe June or August elections, especially going through the processes of the rural areas, informal settlements. In your experience, have you worked in those areas, and what would you do to ensure that the issue of education, issue of encouraging people, knowing why they are voting, just a few concrete, practical examples?
Thank you, Pipi. Yeah, I have, yes, extensive community work and community building work over the past many years. The one thing that's a deficit is trust. So oftentimes people in rural or informal settlements feel a lack of trust, a lack of connection, either because of geography or because there's a perception that the powers that be are talking down at them and view them just really as objects rather than really as active participants and solution bringers and change agents. So that's something that has to be redressed. The second is like ongoing public education, and I mean this is something that I think I've done for with colleagues for many, many years, literally on the ground. So I believe in workshops, I believe in community dialoguing. I believe also though and not projects which are there to, not projects which are there for somebody to come from, from a newspaper and say, oh look, here's the project, and then they disappear. But I think meaningful community engagement where you then have champions and sponsors within the community, faith-based faith-based groupings, principals of schools, parents, parent-teacher associations, farmers groups. We used to work a lot when I was doing work on trade justice with fishermen's groups out in the Cape. So really your grassroots community-based communities, trade unions, and so on. But there needs we have to get away from the idea that engagement is a once-off event. It's something that happens over some tea and some bologna sandwiches, and then people go, cameras go, and there's nothing really substantive that's left. I think the whole idea of why to vote is exactly why I think a lot of people are getting quite disillusioned by Imbizo, is that yes, people come, they share, they pour out their hearts, they sit down, they sit on the floor together, and have some acheo together, and then the next day it's all over. Next day the person doesn't pick up their phone. The next day they don't even return their email. They don't open their emails, and I think that really, in partnership with other public bodies, in partnership with parliamentary bodies, in partnership with local council, provincial government, and so on, and these other, the multiplicity of community stakeholders, including the business community and so forth. We need to find ways to encourage people, remind people why they should vote. We need to give them that answer. We need to be that answer.
How do you ensure the integrity of staff? I mean, you spoke about, the CJ asked about the security of the systems, integrity of information, which is the high currency. How do you ensure the integrity of staff of the IEC, especially because as well, they are also high currency when they are there? How would you make sure that we don't have staff who will be selling their birthright?
Perhaps you can clarify when you say selling the birthright.
I mean, staff which will be selling the very same information, making sure that they give the elections or the whatever to foreign interest.
Thank you. Well, really, you can never judge a person, can't confirm a person. I think that really, that's really to do with much more rigorous recruitment mechanisms, much more rigorous and diverse recruitment as well, so that if anybody feels like compelled in any way to, as you say, sell information or sell our democratic birthright, there will be sanctions. That's another thing. I think that the whole idea, there have to be sanctions. Being a state official, being an official of state, is really an ambassadorial position. It's not about sitting here. This is not Malume's tax shop. This is something important. Taxpayers pay for this. The nation looks at you. People's aspirations and posterities are vested in the way that we conduct ourselves today. And if a person doesn't understand that, well, why are they there?
But what would you make sure that you have the staff which is credible?
I think really the best we can do is, good recruiting processes, ensuring that you recruit from a broad pool of sectors, of skills bases, mix the geography, of course, an important gender mix, gender is incredibly important. And I think that we have to have the, performance management systems in place, the right checks and balances in place regularly to ensure that, key performance indicators are being met and pick up on issues in good time. I mean, if somebody has their hand in the cookie jar, we will pick up through, rigorous audit processes and so on and so forth. I think you cannot police, I don't think we can police people into good conduct. We have to inspire people into good conduct, in my opinion. But I mean, the bad eggs need to go somewhere and not be in the system.
What about vetting?
Certainly. I think that's part of a rigorous recruitment process, background checks, and so on and so forth.
And who should do it?
Yes.
I'm saying who should do it?
Who should?
Yes. The IEC's responsibility, or
if it's IEC staff, it's the IEC's responsibility, I would imagine.
Okay. The issue of intergenerational spaces, I agree with you that respectfully doing that. Our country is in such a state where we sometimes not focus on the robust debate, which sometimes you find that, I think you are aware as well on social media, the engagements which are there, a lot of young people engaging, and even the very same public fora where the engagements are no longer robust and factual. Find that there's a lot of insulting, name-calling. What do you think we can change for the better as a country? Because we are at a state where we no longer focus on facts, but we focus on sensationalization and the negative narrative, which is because as the commissioner and being central to the democracy of the country, strengthening that constitutional democracy, what do you think you can contribute towards that?
Thank you. I think raising the tone of the debates, raising the tone of what the messaging, raising the tone of the conversations. It goes back briefly to what CJ asked me initially when I was saying that it'd be very useful for each commissioner to have some kind of a platform of excellence, some platform of knowledge, where they are the people who set the tone. If it's something on electoral technology, they are the ones who set the tone, whether it's media and engagement, media and political parties. They are the ones that set the tone. I don't think that we can stop people from insulting each other by telling them not to, but we just have to set the bar and keep it high.
Okay, the media, I see you received the Million Guardian Young Leaders Award in 2008. What role must the media play in that space, especially the narrative which they have, especially for the integrity of the IEC and how critical the 2019 elections are? What would you do as the commissioner to make sure that the narrative is factual? Again, not name-calling and issues of character assassination. What would that do to the IEC? Yeah.
So, oftentimes I think many people don't actually understand how elections function and understand the work of the IEC or the commissions in general appropriately. And I've seen some one or two disturbing reports in previous elections where things are reported in a way that is, if they had paused and verified, it would have been useful. It would have been useful. And I think that having an open and regular engagement with media stakeholders is very critical. I don't want to believe that people are inherently mischievous, one or two, but I'd like to believe that people would like to do better if they know better. They'd like to report more meaningfully with the right information, or with at least the choice of different forms of information from which to then draw some kind of conclusions, some kind of independent assessment of what they see before them. And that should be arranged, that can be easily coordinated, regular media briefings, regular, running workshops together and seminars together, and really building capacity, building and strengthening capacity, because it's one thing to build it, but I think to deepen it means then you're always moving forward, you're always ahead of the curve in terms of the information, the policy debates, the outcomes of policy debates as they evolve. And our country changes every day. Today will not be the same as tomorrow.
Building capacity of the journalists.
Of the journalists.
Especially in the field.
Especially in the field, and of all of us. And the way that things are reported as well. And I think, of course, there's a lot that we can also borrow, learn from, exchange different electoral commissions across the region in particular. Zimbabwe, they're going into the elections right now. So, I mean, what is it that we can draw on or teach, or even if it's a how not to guide, there's always something to learn.
Are you still the board member of CASAC?
No, I'm not.
Oh, you're no longer?
No, I left about a year ago.
Okay,
Thank you.
There's corruption all over the world, and South Africa has its fair share of corruption. Which seems to suggest that we must be even more vigilant as it comes to elections. Now, money can be a very powerful tool, regardless of who you are. If it's good enough, and you're potentially corrupt, could manipulate those elections left, right, and center given a chance. And it may even get easier if it's more than one person. who happens to be corrupt but was able to interview his or her way through to where it matters the most in the IEC. As Commissioner, what measures, what broad measures would you want to satisfy yourself are in place to lessen the risk of election rigging that could easily destroy our country?
Thank you, CJ. So I think there is, what is it they call it? Multiple vote tabulation. That's one mechanism that's been used in some places to ensure that whilst the votes are being counted, there are audits and there are other statisticians who are also working to ensure that there isn't only one way of arriving at an equitable and credible outcome, because it's all about credibility, and once credibility is gone, it's incredibly difficult to get it back. So the one thing is multiple ways of arriving at a voter total. The other way to do that is then to ensure that at every single benchmark or milestone of the voter tabulation, there is a transparent count. So firstly starting at the voting station, and then at ward level, at district level, and so on and so forth. This is to enable there to be the minimum, to minimize the gaps within which any manipulation or any funny stuff could arise. Voter ballot boxes going missing, or ballot boxes suddenly appearing, stuffed ballot boxes suddenly appearing. And it's costly, but I think that it's not as costly as the loss of credibility. It's not as costly as the loss of integrity of the process. We only do this once every 5 years. Some countries it's even once every 7 years. We must invest everything that we can in ensuring that it doesn't only just perform procedural democracy, procedural elections as a process, but that it is substantively seen to be have integrity.
Actual or perceived electoral irregularities, whether it's in Potchefstroom, Kilkware, Alexander, or anywhere else, seems to provide lessons on the strength of which, or on the basis of which, we could improve our systems, or else. What is it based on reports, correct or incorrect, in relation to irregularities, rigging of elections, that you think the IEC needs to ensure is in place or doesn't exist anymore, just so that the credibility of our elections are beyond reproach, beyond doubt?
Thank you, CJ. So the one is really to enable us to have to explore different forms of electoral processing. There are different schools of thought. Whether electronic is the way to go, whether good old paper is the way to go. The truth is that there will be risk with any mechanism, and every system is subject to risk. And I think, as the PP has alluded to, there will always be people in the system who may try to pull a fast one. A few things do need to be in place, and I think I've suggested one or two. That it's important to have multi-party monitors at every level, both electronic monitoring and also people who are monitoring, stakeholders, to minimize the risk of things going wrong and boxes falling out of trucks or falling into trucks, in fact. The second is also to ensure then that perhaps we can have cross tabulation. And this cross tabulation would either be through electronic voter registration and electronic voting mechanisms, which tabulate with what has been done by hand. A bit costly, maybe double the personnel, but might be worth exploring. We might also want to explore minimize the possibility of the bust-in question, where people suddenly arrive in an area a few weeks before the election and then they disappear soon after the elections. How do we minimize that? The fourth is municipal, the boundary demarcation, and that's been a hotspot of debate and gymnastics, legal gymnastics for people like yourselves over the last few years. And I think that we need to think about ways in which we make our demarcation facilities and boards work much harder to ensure that they are not subject to political manipulation. I don't think that we can have a situation where somebody decides to draw a line halfway through mid-rand the day before, well, figuratively, a month before elections, because they feel that this will then increase the possibility of victory. You must have far more robust bodies who are able to say, no, this is on what basis? Because, I mean, these things are a process, right? There's a whole process in which you decide that a place is going to be redemarcated. And I think that lastly, we should think about different accountabilities. And I think one of the things that when I say I cry for the beloved country is that even when irregularities are discovered, even when people are found to have been complicit in those irregularities, rarely do we see heads rolling. And I think that if one or two more heads were to roll, that would send a strong message that there's zero tolerance for this kind of conduct from public officials.
If you were the IEC, what is it that you would have done to make sure that the court order that says the addresses of registered voters must be reflected, the National Common Voters Roll are in fact reflected, or a description that creates the possibility for a voter to be traced to his or her place of residence is given. Villages, formal settlements, what is it that you would have done in a just very practical steps that anybody can relate to, that you would have taken or cost people to take to achieve that objective?
So this is probably where we need to have far more vigorous partnerships with local council. If people are paying bills, electricity, water rates, and so on.
Informal settlement village.
Yes.
In my village, okay, some pay electricity, others are not connected, and there are still a number of people who's no number, nothing. What then would you do?
I'm coming there. Thank you, CJ. So, yeah, we need to go to the ground. I think that's when you go to schools, you go to parishes, you go to community clinics and hospitals, records of people's births, records of where they went to school, records that show that they are part of this particular area. Particularly, as you rightly say, I know that my parents' village, there'll always be somebody who remembers somebody, or who went to school there, so there'll be some bishop or somebody who'll be able to vouch for the fact that you are a part of this community. I think that in informal settlements, especially urban informal settlements, that is a bit more challenging, Chief Justice. It's more challenging because of people's human mobility. It's more challenging because they will not necessarily be easy to trace every 5 years or even every year. That's because of really the vicariousness and the precariousness of a lot of people's circumstances, which takes me back to the bridge.
Well, before you go, let's assume it's your an informal settlement as big as Dipsfield, no school, no clinic, nothing, and they are not going anywhere. They are there, they are registered, but their addresses are not reflected. All you have to do is make sure that there is an address or a description of a voter, a description that facilitates tracing that person to where they live.
It would take a lot of personnel, Chief Justice, to go door to door, literally door to door, to enable to trawl this sort of information. It may be necessary, but that would be a huge undertaking. I don't believe that it's the role of the IEC to take on that undertaking alone. It would also be the role of local government. it would also be the role of the municipality to ensure that people have addresses. Kanti, where do they, I mean, if they're receiving letters, Kanti Batubaba Mollakai, how does this happen? The postal services, the post office services, and so on. The question of informality is a huge challenge, because informality in our context isn't informal, it's permanent informality. So I think we have to find different mechanisms then of ensuring that a person is registered or is known, their existence is known and registered. And I would still say, go back to say that perhaps without even without the address, without causing disorder and without causing risks to the integrity of the voting process.
Well, I put it to one of the candidates, anyway, let me put it no higher than this. I think it's a simple thing. Drop a list of numbers for any of the informal settlements, any village. Take a paint, brush, list of numbers, 1 to whatever number, and you mark them, update, mark them, update. After all, that's the Statistics General's office goes there, door to door, count people. Why should it be difficult for the IEC, even if it means they must partner with them? Because there's an order E, why is it so difficult to mark a number? Oh, whatever, Peku informal settlement, number 1. Who put a name there? That's where the PP lives, number 1. Why is this thing so complicated? Why should people come to the IEC, put up a tent and say, come to me? What are they going to get? What's in it for them? Do they have that? Have they been given enough voter education to see they need to come to you instead of you coming to them? Anyway, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Chief Justice and the panelists.
Your excuse, thank you so much. Okay, so we go back to Good morning, Ms. Obada.
Good morning, Chief Justice.
Please accept our apologies that we kept you waiting.
Apology accepted. I fully understand.
Are you well?
I'm very well, thank you. And are you well?
Thank you. Is the Land Claims Commission winning or struggling?
It's a bit of both.
A bit of both.
It's a bit of both. Some inroads have been made, but also changes need to be made.
Why do you want to move from the Land Claims Commission to the Independent Electoral Commission?
Very good question. I think that I started in the Commission on the Prosecution of Land Rights in 2012.
Yes.
I had a 5-year contract, which was renewed last year. And perhaps if I go back to my adult life, I think that most of my focus has been on service to the people of South. So my view is that I want to be able to serve anywhere I can, and perhaps having served in the Commission for as long as I have, it possibly could be an opportunity for me to serve elsewhere.
It was extended, your contract was extended when
last year.
For how long?
For further 5 years.
Are you not disadvantaging the process when there is so much anxiety around the land issues? Don't they need your institutional memory and special skills and experience there?
Perhaps so, but at the same time, I also think that you might need new blood, especially in the context of the current discourse. Perhaps if you bring in somebody who can come in from outside, who can breathe new life, different perspective, that also could be important.
What difference do you see yourself making in the IEC, in the way the elections are run, if appointed commissioner?
Thank you, Chair. I think that with the experience that I have in the private sector, in the NGO sector, in government, I bring a whole lot of experience from from different perspectives. And having worked very, very closely, for example, with the Portfolio Committee on Rural Development and understanding the different roles, I think that I will be able to bring in wisdom from the Commission's perspective, as in the Commission on Restitution of Land Rights, understanding government protocol, but also from private sector or NGO sector, understanding the role of civil sector. For me, I think it's also about access to justice in the context of ensuring that there is broad understanding and consensus of what the importance of elections. And so I believe that with my knowledge, I will be able to look at the systems, look at opportunities of growth for growth, look at impact, but at the same time ensure that there is monitoring of the Commission so that we're able to comply with the prescripts of the law.
From afar, either as a citizen or a citizen who is preparing for this interview, are there challenges that you have picked up that affect or relate to the IEC? And if so, what are those challenges?
I think for me, one challenge would be that of the registration of addresses on the voters' roll. I think that perhaps it's a challenge that we should have anticipated, but at the same time, one which is not insurmountable. because I think that it is important for both the individual who has a right to vote, important for the political parties, but also important for our democracy, because the election process is a bedrock of democracy. And if we are going to grow as a democracy, we have to ensure that consistently the Independent Electoral Commission is seen as a credible institution, one that is perceived to be in control of its obligations, and also is trusted by the citizen.
If you were the IEC, immediately after an order was issued that the addresses be reflected, what would you have done? What practical steps would you have ensured are taken so that there is compliance within the prescribed time period? If you were the IEC, nothing happened without you taking every step that needed to be taken.
I think perhaps the first step would be for us to look at what is on the voters' roll, and then identify the gaps between what is required and what is not there, and proactively have a strategy that is going to go to various localities to try and ensure that proactively we get people to update their records. I think, for example, with us as Commission on Restitution of Land Rights, what we did was we actually commissioned three, I think it's four mobile buses, offices, where we actually appointed staff to actually go into the rural areas and spend, for example, a week on site. We would have communication strategy to say, we are coming to this locality this week. We would like all of the people who want to watch to come and register there, and we're able to then update their information on site. So the buses actually are offices that are on the road, so that we're able to by district, because I mean we've got clear localities, actually encourage people to come and update their records. I understand though that there is a challenge when it comes to, for example, rural areas, like deep rural areas and perhaps informal settlements. I think though if we were to work with the ward councillors and work with the municipalities, we would be able to find a way to register each informal settlement. For example, if you talk about the housing register, where people are waiting for RDP houses, if you go to the human settlement, to each informal settlement, you'll find that there's a number on the informal structure, and very often they'll say this number was written in by the Department of Human Settlement because I am number so and so on the list for allocation of an RDP house. So we could find ways